So at this point, what I would suggest is that you rip off a chunk of trace paper and do an overlay. So overlays are quite fun to do. And again, I would recommend that you do them fairly loose and quickly, because they're not really intended to be a final drawing. So what I'll show is the fence line and the garage and the other fence line and the house. And that lilac's going to show up. Any big features like trees, I'm just going to quickly sketch them on so that you have a sense of context. And I always, on this little sketch, I will always put the doors. So our traffic flow is going to go from this door to the other door. And that's definitely a major flow. We're not going to walk too far out of our way to do that one. And now that we've suggested a fire pit here, there's going to be a little arrow, and then from the side yard into garden box land, we're either going to come here or we're actually going to come around it. So that's something that could be just sketched in really lightly. We're not sure how the flow is going to go there. And then from around this side of the house, doing this, it kind of makes sense that our compost wood pile would do something like that. So one other thing we were thinking of is the water feature. So water features are interesting in that they aren't always a room of their own. Sometimes they're a transition that goes in between rooms. So it might be something that lives kind of in the middle here, where in between the patio and the fire pit, you might have a bridge and there might be water that you're walking over. So that creates quite an interest in the whole big scheme of things. So if I added a bigger circle to this whole area, we could see that the fire pit and the pond and the patio could have a nice overall design connection in between them. So I like to not necessarily use a pond as its own element. So then my next thing is to just write on some circles that say what those elements were. Fire pit, garden boxes, and the patio. And I still would like to represent on this little trace paper where it is that we're doing a bit of screening in between. So definitely between garden boxes and the patio area. Definitely behind the fire pit facing the lane and where the neighbor's view comes in, and also just screening off this compost area. So you can see that we have major flow drawn in with a larger arrow, and then the smaller flows are coming in from the sides and into these other areas. So if we want to add in the pond feature right now, we could just kind of sketch it here and write pond, and maybe this would be a bridge somewhere in that area. So what this does is it gives us what we call a concept drawing. And you can see if I remove the underneath plan, it shows up quite nicely in relation to each other. It's a very nice graphic representation of what we were thinking of. So the beauty of using these circles is that you could go back. We'll take off our screening symbols and our larger rooms and just kind of say, what could concept number 2 look like? And could we do something that's just a little bit different? So one option, of course, would be to put the garden boxes back here next to the driveway. And we have lots of sun reflecting off the driveway, so they should probably do quite well there. And maybe we move the fire pit and the patio a little bit closer to each other and connect them. Our compost might actually go with the garden boxes that direction. But then we start to say, well, there isn't really anything over here. This could just be lawn to run around in the lilacs. So there is sometimes a little bit of a conflict between the compost pile and the wood pile. So we might move them around here so they're a little bit more hidden from the rest of the garden. So this would be a different arrangement. And if we look at the way these rooms overlap, the bigger picture of these spaces, we can start to get a sense of where things are overlapping. So you see with the patio and the fire pit, we've connected them and the overlap is really huge. So it's almost like they've become one thing. And our compost could take up a little bit less space, which would leave more openness through here. So now if we put a trace paper over top of that, again, we'll sketch things on. Garden boxes. And we're just going to do the fire and the patio close to each other. The compost here. And once again, we'll do a quick outline. Outline the house. Sketch in the door. And the door. And probably that lilac, because it's not going anywhere. And now we'll work on our traffic flow. So from the door to the other door, is again our major transition. A smaller one into the garden boxes. We're already right at the edge of the patio here. And coming around the corner, access to the compost, and around the corner here we're kind of catching in the edge of the patio here. So our screening, we still probably we don't want too much screening on this side of the garden boxes or it'll shade them. So our screening might go here, and we still might do a little bit of screening here. So it feels a little bit different this time. So we're going to write our screening. You can see the overlap between those two rooms is right here. And the overlap of the compost with the lilac area. So it feels quite different. And then the last piece that we wanted to put back in is probably our our water feature. So we start to play with that one, and just moving it around. Can we still cross a bridge with it? Yes, but that feature actually feels a little bit tighter in this area to do that. So we might even think about tucking it in over here, and the bridge would cross where our pathway goes around to the side yard. So from the patio and the fire pit, we could enjoy a water feature here with a bit of a bridge. So we're going to sketch that in, kind of tucked into this area, and we'll write bridge this way. So in this concept, we have a bit more grass as a big area. So you can see it was fairly easy to come up with a second concept. I find when people work directly on the base plan for this part of the designing, that they will get really hung up on, they've already drawn something, and it's a lot of work when you're not used to drawing. It feels like a very stressful experience. So putting something on paper with a pencil is a big deal. So what we're doing is saying, could we come up with a couple of options here that don't mess up our base plan and allows us to have a little bit of flexibility in our thinking. And the other advantage to doing this is that you can line up these two concepts side by side. So you can get a very good sense of what feels most interesting to you, and what would you like to change, or can you see any problems showing up. And usually there's one person in the household that is really excited about drawing a plan, and they're the ones doing all of this. So if they showed up and there was only one plan and they talked to the family about it, then often it can feel like criticism when anybody makes a comment. It's like, oh, I don't like the garden boxes over there. I think they should be over here near the house. And so immediately you feel a little bit deflated because you've put all this work into coming up with this plan, and it feels not very supportive. Whereas if you come along with two plans, what other people in your house are going to do is give you something that's called feedback. And so it's to them it's the same thing as it would have been in the first case, but now it feels more like options are coming out, and they're just expressing their observations, and it feels a lot less stressful for most people. So in this case, we can say, oh, we really like the idea of the garden boxes over here, so we're not looking at them all the time, and I like the idea of the fire and the patio being connected. Or they might say, let's move the patio here and put the fire here and have less lawn to cut. Maybe we're not going to have much lawn except for around the lilac tree. And that feels like a much more interesting discussion. So what usually ends up happening is you'll have concept 3. And so again, just rearrange your bubbles, put a piece of trace over top, and you've got the third concept. So this is a discussion that really doesn't have a lot of detail to it, and it keeps things very light and flexible, movable, so that the whole process has a nice creativity to it, and you're not so concerned about getting it right at this point and being very stressful about it. So I would suggest having all of these things that aren't there yet or are movable, put them onto the bubbles and let them move around. So if you have a shed and it doesn't seem to be quite in the right spot and it is movable, put it on a bubble and allow it to move and see if there might be a better option that shows up. So at this point, we're at what we call the concept stage. So we've generated a few concepts and things are feeling a lot more interesting. And the next course that would follow would be creating garden rooms. So we would take each of these areas and we would say, for example, this fire pit patio area now feels like it has one big room around it, and it it is something that would get designed as a whole. So the garden rooms will look at what are the shapes and actual sizes of these things, and how does the furniture work, and what are these things that divide it from this room to this room, and how big should this sidewalk be? So all of those elements will start to unfold in a very natural way and will make perfect sense. It's almost like they design themselves once they get to this point of being landing onto the base plan. So what I suggest is that you take your base plan and slide this concept underneath so we can get rid of all the bubbles. And just take this plan and put it in between the two layers that we already have here. So here's where it's nice. We've got the black lines. We can line them up. And now what we're working with, a piece of tape. You can see that our original threshold and traffic flow is still showing up a little bit underneath, but now the concept that we liked is also showing up. So you can tape that to the back of your base plan, and it remains as a guide for you without overpowering the whole processes that are to come. It's just we're remembering what's going to be there, and it just allows a really nice unfolding from here into the next part. So congratulations on getting some concepts done, and hopefully we'll see you in the next part where we define all these wonderful garden rooms. Thank you.